We officially know what BYU's 2026 football schedule looks like, and I got to say right out of the chute, it looks mighty favorable for the Cougars.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. I'm Jake Hatch, 14-year credentialed media member at BYU, your resident expert and insider, your host here on the show. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen today. Thank you for making all of us over at Locked On, America's #1 sports podcast network. Coming up on today's show, we're digging into BYU's 2026 football schedule. Call it a schedule special if you want. We'll examine the overall look of how things lay out for BYU this coming fall. We'll get into some of the tricky games, why BYU's playing on conference weekend on a Saturday of all things. We'll get into that. We'll also talk about what I think the expectation levels should be for BYU, as well as getting your comments on where the floor for the BYU Cougars should be. It's all ahead on today's show, and it's all brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Of course, FanDuel is in playoff mode every game day during the NFL playoffs. FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action. Visit FanDuel.com to get started now. All right, so if you'd missed it earlier this morning, the Big 12 did their big reveal on Inside the Big 12, the show that airs all over ESPNU. I think it was on FS2. It was on a bunch of different channels, also streaming live on YouTube. They revealed the full 2026 football schedule for every school in the conference, including BYU. Now, the biggest question I had going into this was, okay, Notre Dame and BYU scheduled that home and home series, which starts in Provo this coming fall. And it was supposed to fill in the slot that Notre Dame routinely has played USC in, which has always been in mid-October. But the question was the Big 12 going to let BYU essentially step out of conference play at that time of the year and play that game against Notre Dame? And I expected they would indeed do that. And we got the good news that officially they will do that. I'm going to throw up the schedule here for those of you that may have missed it. I'll share the screen so you guys can see that. But the bigger point is, with that game moving into mid-October, that moved the non-conference game that BYU originally had scheduled against Cal on September 12th. Well, it was an open date. So the hope was that, BYU is not going to have a week 2 bye and then play 11 straight games. That would just been absolutely foolhardy for them to think that they could do that. But the nice part is the Big 12 did step up and helped out BYU by putting the Arizona game in that slot. And I think that is going to make for, I think, a pretty decent setup for the BYU football program, because that allows you, your first Big 12 game is week 2. Yeah, you do get that tune-up against Utah Tech to open the season. That obviously is a scheduled win. And then it's on. You play Arizona, who is they're probably the surprise team of the Big 12 this past season. You play them in your second straight home game to kick off the season. Then the following week, you make the trek across the Rockies to the Front Range to Fort Collins, Colorado, to face off against the Colorado State Rams. I'm not too keen on BYU continually playing these games against G6 opponents in their home stadiums, but so be it. It is what it is. And then you have your first bye week. Do I think that a week 4 bye is advantageous? No, but the trade-off is, because BYU is going to play that game against Notre Dame in mid-October, that obviously necessitated you moving your bye week up. And I also looked at the other conference teams and looked at what's going on with the Big 12. The vast majority of the schools, outside of one, Houston is the only one who has a bye week that goes past week 7, which is essentially the midway point of this season. Now, this is one of those years where you only have the one bye week. It kind of depends on how the calendar falls on any given year. If you get the double bye like BYU has had the past 2 years, or in this case, this season, where the season starts September 5th, and that compresses the schedule where you only have the one bye. So the rest of the Big 12, along with BYU, has earlier buys than I think some of them may have anticipated. Utah, for example, is a week after BYU. They have it in week 5. But I look at this schedule on its head. Like I said, you go home, then you're away, but you have a bye week splitting up the road game at Colorado State, then you're at TCU. That's actually a pretty decent, it's a good test to start the year for BYU, but it's also not a murderer's row. Then you come back for back-to-back home games. You host Iowa State and then the aforementioned Notre Dame game in mid-October. You go to UCF, return home for a Halloween game against Arizona State, and then there's the big one. Saturday, November 7th, BYU travels up to Utah. I am still going to stump for the fact that I believe that this game for BYU and Utah should be on the final weekend of the regular season. I understand why the Big 12 is not doing it because they want to move it around into different TV windows and maybe garner some extra eyeballs. I think there has been some thought from these two universities that with the extra toll it can exact on these teams, both physically and mentally, that if either one of them, which I think BYU's expectations are, they're going to make a return trip to the Big 12 conference title game, that you don't want that game necessarily the week before the Big 12 title game, which also, by the way, if you missed this, is moving to Friday night, December 4th. It'll be a Friday evening game, 6 o'clock Mountain Time, 8 o'clock Eastern. Apparently the Big 12 is going to alternate every other year, either playing it Friday night or Saturday morning for us in the Mountain Time Zone at 10 a.m. So interesting dynamic of play there. Now, other quick thoughts on the schedule. So you finish up that run at Utah, then the back third, I guess I should say, of the schedule at Utah, home to Baylor, at Kansas, which could be tricky in mid to late November, going out to Lawrence, and then you're back at home as BYU has been the past, I believe it's 2 years. Yeah, they've had home games on the final weekend of the regular season against Cincinnati. I like the fact that there are no road back-to-backs. I know that there is the one with TCU and Colorado State, but it's broken up by that bye week. And the way this lays out here, it has a nice mix of, I think, true tests for BYU on the schedule, but it's those tests are sandwiched by more manageable games. And what I mean by that is, think about this. You play Utah Tech, you play Arizona. Arizona is going to be a tough opponent. I got no problem saying that. Them coming to Provo, that double overtime thriller down there in Tucson, they're going to want revenge. And BYU's Big 12 opener at home. Then you go to Colorado State, should be manageable there. At TCU could be a little interesting going down there. But then you're home against Iowa State, which is in full-on rebuild mode with Jimmy Rogers taking over after Matt Campbell's exit. You're home to Notre Dame. Then you go out on the road to UCF, which is still not ideal to go to the East Coast, but you handle your business in Orlando, come home to face off against Arizona State, and then go to Utah. Really the toughest back-to-back set of games here is at home to Arizona State, and at Utah. Then home to Baylor, at Kansas, at home to Cincinnati. I think it lays out actually very in an advantageous way for the BYU football program to have the schedule set up the way it is. And I do think it is going to give BYU an opportunity to chase 10, 11, 12 wins. That's the simple fact of life. With the amount of talent that BYU has returning here, they should be able to rack up a bunch of wins. And they should be able to do it at a pretty consistent clip. Many of you recall, if you're an everydayer, that goes all the way back to when the schedule for 2025 was released last year. We talked about the 6-game stretch going from mid-October into mid-November, of that being the murderer's row for BYU. There's no such stretch, in my opinion, here that is going to kill BYU's chances. Like I said, the toughest set of games back-to-back is a home game against Arizona State, and then the trek 40 miles north to face off against Utah in back-to-back weeks. But outside of that, like I said, the tests are fairly manageable, and you do have a nice setup of games that are right there for the taking if you're BYU. So I look forward to seeing how the Cougars perform against this slate, but there's also, I think, some trap games in there, and there's also some questions I'm sure that you guys have as well, because you obviously pay attention to the schedule as close as I do, and we'll get into that. I do think that there are some, do I call it a trap game or just games that could trip you up? That's probably a good term to use. And we'll dig more into those momentarily right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Woodward Park City. Now, we're just going to say it. The fun per foot ratio at Woodward Park City is second to none. Located just 20 minutes from Salt Lake Valley, Woodward offers experiential learning in a radically fun and safe environment. They have their all-new Winter Mountain Park Passes, $499. You can ride all season long at one of the best terrain parks in the entire Wasatch Front and get the absolute best value out of your winter. And it's the best place to maximize your mountain time. It's an easy in, easy out, meaning no pay to park, no shuttle to the mountain. Just show up and you can ride. I think all of us want that when it comes to getting out on the snow. Simply put, the easiest place in Utah to learn and experience your first time skiing and snowboarding, if that's what your situation is. Vehicle parking close to the mountain, easy walking access to facilities, rental shop, and lifts that feature perfect learning terrain. It's all with our friends over at Woodward Park City. Not all just big jumps and rails. Enjoy a warm or cold beverage in the hub with a bite of food after your session. Can you say happy campers? Once again, their winter seasonal programs help you build confidence, develop your skills, and have a blast on the mountain with their outdoor winter and ski and snowboard programs for kids of all ages going from 4 to 17. And also, you adults that want to get into it, it's all available to you now. So just 20 minutes from Salt Lake City, Woodward offers that experiential learning with facilities for all abilities. Learn more right now at woodwardparkcity.com. That's woodwardparkcity.com. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And thank you for making all of us over at Locked On, America's #1 sports podcast network. All right. So the questions that inevitably arise from this BYU schedule. That's a good question. We're going to have a winter, Jake. It's a great question. I wish we were, because I miss snow, but that's personal opinion on the matter. And we have not had a lot of it. But getting back to the schedule question for BYU, the number one question that has been lobbed to me by our insider group members, by people that I know personally have texted me, one of my college roommates who I literally just had lunch with, was, hey, Jake, why are we playing a game on conference weekend on a Saturday night? And my answer has been, well, let's remember that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has done away with the evening session of General Conference. There's only going to be 4 sessions of conference versus the 5 there have been forever. And that evening session on Saturday night is no longer a thing, thereby, at least in my opinion, opening up the window that BYU can play on conference weekend. And I'll reiterate to some of you who are not maybe as old as I am or some of our other listeners, BYU has played on conference weekend before. I can vividly remember, I have to go back and look at it. It's sometime in the late 90s, early 2000s. I think it's the Mountain West era, that Gordon B. Hinckley, then prophet and president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, got up during men's priesthood session, which used to be the evening session, was the priesthood session. And it said that, I know that there is a big game because BYU and Colorado State were going to play that night at 8:00 when the evening session ended. And I said, I know that there's some interest in a game that's coming up, and we're essentially going to cut this thing short. And got his talking, and that was the end of the meeting. So BYU has played on conference weekend before. And there's a good question here by Caden. Do we know for sure it'll be a night game, though? I guess you can't guarantee that, that it wouldn't be during the day or whatever. Here's the deal. I think BYU will play whenever the conference and the TV networks say they have to play that game, but they will obviously, I think, push and explain that, hey, there is this thing called General Conference that you're well aware of, because the Independence era, Utah State routinely and BYU played on that Friday night. Since BYU joined the conference 3 years ago, they have played on that Friday night of General Conference weekend. They haven't had the bye week that week. And I think that the Big 12 is smart enough to realize that they could cut into what could be a bunch of different viewers if they play that game during the day, during one of the general sessions of General Conference. So I think that they understand. Yeah. So Jeff, BYU CSU played conference weekend 2004. And I think I was trying to think, I think it was like 2004 when that happened. Because Gordon B. Hinckley, I remember, I could tell you the exact spot I was sitting at my old church house. And I remember thinking, wow, he gets it. I'm a football fan. What can I say? But yeah, so they have played on General Conference weekend, and that's why that TCU game, I know it stood out that it was scheduled for Saturday, but let's also add the caveat here that all these games currently are slated for Saturdays this fall. We do not know yet what the TV networks are going to do with this schedule, and that obviously could adjust some of these games. Might be that TCU game where a TV network like ESPN says, hey, in fact, we'd actually like that on Friday night instead. Can we move it? And that will happen. There will be some changes for TV networks. So expect at least, I think, one Friday game. I think at some point during this slate, one of those games will be adjusted to Friday. It could be TCU, but also, as Goodman points out, a nice trip for out-of-staters. Come for general conference, stay for the football game. That's a good point. And yeah, I do expect that it would be played on at night if it indeed stays on that Saturday. It's personal opinion. I don't have any ins with the networks to be able to say I can report this, but I just think that the Big 12 and these TV networks are smart enough to realize that there is a big audience that they would be absolutely missing out on if that game is scheduled anything later, or not anything earlier than 6 o'clock Eastern, 4 o'clock Mountain Time when the afternoon session wraps up with general conference on Saturday. So I do think that one is an interesting one. The other dynamic at play here is that early bye week. Week 4 is not ideal because BYU will play 3 games, have a bye week, and then play 9 straight games. We all know that during the independent era, there were seasons where BYU had a bye week as late as, I think, week 12. They had some early bye weeks as well. And when you play a long string of games, especially at the Power 4 level, that invites the opportunity of your team getting run down and not being as fresh as they could be once the end of the season comes. And I think we all expect that this BYU football program is going to be challenging for Big 12 supremacy once again this fall. I think that is the clear-cut expectation for BYU. Love to see them break through and win the Big 12 title, obviously, but playing 9 straight games after an early bye week, that's going to test BYU and the literal bodies of these young men that play the sport that we all love. That is going to be a really, really tough gauntlet. And yes, it would have been ideal to have that bye week, week 7, I think it's week 7, when BYU and Notre Dame are scheduled to play, but that's kind of the trade-off you make here to play Notre Dame. Is you say, hey, we'll play you whenever we can get you. Notre Dame says October 17th, done. And that's, I think, the long and short of it. I do think that it plays out that simply, that you trade off saying, okay, I know that playing 3 games, one of them against an FCS team, which is a glorified bye week in and of itself, week 1, really only have 2 games, and then you're going to take a week off. Yeah, you would have liked to maybe seen that bye week slide back a week or 2, but when you get the trade-off of having the likes of Notre Dame come to LaVell Edwards Stadium, I think you just kind of roll with it. So I do think it's an interesting dynamic here in terms of how they're going to monitor BYU's team. But I also got a bunch of faith. Remember, this past year, how many like soft tissue injuries, what I mean by that is like hamstring pulls and the like, did you notice, were they a plague on the BYU football program? No, they weren't. Ryan Phillips, Dr. Skylar Main, Colby Clausen, all the strength and conditioning staff, the sports science staff at BYU, they have been nothing short of remarkable at keeping BYU's team really, really healthy, especially the last 2 years as they have racked up that 23-4 record that they have racked up. It's been pretty impressive to watch how healthy this team is come the end of the season, where it doesn't seem like that long ago that it seemed like there was always a rash of ankle injuries, hamstrings, insert whatever other soft tissue injury you can think of for the BYU football program. This staff monitors these players, and they're trying to get their peak performance out of them every single week. And it's going to be a test to keep them at that optimal level for 9 straight weeks against Power 4 opposition, but that's their job. So I'm going to trust the track record of what Ryan Phillips and his strength staff have done, what Colby Clausen and Dr. Skylar Main have done on the sports science side of things, that they will be sure to keep these guys in as good a shape as possible. And so long as they continue to do what they do for BYU, they will be in a good position to compete every single week because they have proven that they can keep the team healthy and peaking essentially every single week. It's not an easy thing to do. Trust me. And in some ways, it's a little bit of luck in terms of keeping guys healthy because it's a violent sport that they all play. But I do think, as I mentioned earlier, that the way this schedule lays out for BYU is there are really stiff tests. Like I think week 2 against Arizona is a stiff game, a stiff test for BYU. Playing against Notre Dame, going to Utah, playing Arizona State. There are tricky games. The road game at TCU on conference weekend. There are tricky games out there. There's also games that kind of intersperse with that are the far more manageable ones as well. So it sets up for BYU to have a really, really strong run here. So I want your guys' thoughts. So if you're in the chat watching this live, I'm also going to intersperse some of our comments from our insider group, our everydayer group members as well about the layout of the schedule. And we'll do that as we wrap up this live edition of Locked On Cougars coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The playoffs are here, and FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get on the action every single game day of the playoffs. Right now, every college football playoff game day, as well as the NFL playoffs, they're giving you guys what they call profit boosts, waiting for you guys in the app. You can ride with your favorite when you think the team's going to control the matchup, take a shot on the underdog, or build a parlay around the players and moments you think will ultimately decide the game. Then you apply that profit boost and get even bigger winnings. And when you win, FanDuel pays out instantly, which is perfect for playoff football. FanDuel is the best place to get on all the playoff action all season long. So visit FanDuel.com to get your profit boost every single game day. Once again, go to FanDuel.com. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Another plug for you guys to join the Everydayer Club. What we've got is text access to get the inside scoop on what I'm hearing about BYU sports. Get access to our members-only Discord server, ad-free audio versions of the podcast, and a whole litany more. The Locked On merch store. If you want access to all that, go to lockedoncougars.supercast.com or go to, once again, the screen here also says lockedonpodcast.com/everydayer. And join us on the Locked On Cougars Everydayer Club. Also be a link in the show notes below. All right, so what do you guys think of this? What do you guys think of the schedule here? Because I do think that the schedule, as I mentioned, is pretty advantageous for BYU. But as Quinn also says here, they just need to plow over many teams. They have that opportunity. There is no doubt about that. They have the opportunity. I think the floor, isn't it 10 wins? Like, really, look at the schedule and tell me you don't see a pathway at minimum to 9 or 10 wins, because that's where I think that is going to be a bigger situation for BYU. Is that we all want to see them back in that Big 12 title game, if not hoisting the Big 12 championship trophy. We all want to see that if you're a Cougar fan. And the way this schedule lays out is BYU is going to be expected to be one of those teams playing in Arlington once again on that Friday night, December 4th. So I do think it is going to be an interesting dynamic to see how BYU does this. Now, Mala, obviously one of our big-time listeners, number one goal this year, beat Utah by 3+ possessions. Now, that 3+ possessions mark, that does not happen very often, especially in the recent past of this rivalry. These two teams, BYU and Utah, for whatever reason, can seemingly never get a difference of more than a possession, it feels like, in any game they play outside of the Jake Heaps game when he had like the 7 turnovers in that game. Like, that really is the biggest dynamic at play here. Is this rivalry game? It's an opportunity for BYU to make it 4 straight wins, but 3 possessions, you beat them by 17+ points. Be pretty impressive, because like I said, the history has never really suggested that they are going to play anything other than a tight contest the rest of the way, it feels like, in these games. So I'm looking forward to seeing how BYU manages this as well. Now, other comments on this. Main wants, this is from Lauren Smith. As always, beat Utah, second beat Notre Dame. I think the Cougars have a bright future next year, already getting some disrespect from Vegas with Utah favored over BYU for a championship. You know what? I know that Vegas, for whatever reason, has Utah favored in terms of chances of winning the Big 12 title, more favorable than BYU. I don't understand why, though, because look at the rosters and the turnover for Utah versus BYU. How much turnover for Utah? Far more than BYU. But as always, I think that BYU, they'll play up that disrespect card. It's absolutely something they can utilize to make themselves play a little bit harder. Good point here by Riker. The floor is 10. BYU has to capitalize on the schedule with this team. The stars have aligned. This is their chance. Kind of feels that way. It really feels like it lays out that BYU should be running towards a college football playoff berth, making the Big 12 title game again. It's all there for the Cougars, and we've seen how close they were not that long ago, the last 2 years. So I really do like, and this is a good point by Jeff Stevens, the schedule is showing what, 16 games, right? We just saw you have to win essentially 16 games to win the college football playoff, which we just saw Indiana do. James Benoit saying my personal line is 10.5. That's over under 10.5. That's a pretty tasty bet. I'm sure that it will be out there. I think my personal opinion is that Notre Dame, with the Notre Dame and Utah game, you'll probably see Vegas set it at 9.5 wins and really kind of make you think about that. That's personal opinion on the matter. So other questions. as someone who works these games, I'm not excited to be working on Halloween. It's my favorite holiday, LOL. Other than that, I can't complain about the schedule. I can't wait for Notre Dame. It comes from Luke. It's a good point by Luke on our Everydayer channel. Hunter is commenting. He said he commented on the live YouTube channel. Hunter, thank you for doing that. If we're healthy at key positions, it's hard to not see us go undefeated. Jeff, wow, you think Notre Dame's the only toss-up? I will always throw Utah in the toss-up category. It just really is a game that, for whatever reason, these two teams really can't separate from one another. And the rivalry element, the nature of that game, it's always in toss-up territory for me. No reason they shouldn't go undefeated by Brady. Notre Dame is the big unknown. The rivalry is the rivalry, but aside from Notre Dame, they should handle their business. I love the bravado, Brady. I think that's a solid take from you. It's an overall break for BYU. I like it other than the early bye as stated. That comes in from Dirk. I do think that early bye, it's not ideal, but once again, the trade-off, if you're going to get Notre Dame in mid-October, I think that probably was the weekend you probably had that bye week coming, and maybe you said, okay, you know what? We'll just deal with it. Michael, if we don't win all 12 games, we won't be ranked. It's too weak of a schedule. Sadly, by the time it's time to remove tiny schools like an FCS team. Now, Michael shares my thought. I really don't like FCS games. I think I've reiterated on this podcast a handful of times that I think the FCS games should be revamped in the future of college football, where they essentially become your spring game. You still pay the FCS schools the money that they're looking for, because that's what it is. It's a money game. They're trying to line their pockets. You play that game at the end of spring camp, and that gives your younger players a real nice note to end spring ball on. You probably don't play your starters in that game. You're probably playing your younger players to really get a feel for it. It's a glorified exhibition, but isn't that what it's already is in the regular season? I think FCS games in the regular season are just kind of a waste of everybody's time, isn't it? So personal opinion on the matter there. And I guess a good point here by as well by Zedalva? Zedaleva? Okay, I think I butchered that. So the schedule is worse before Cal dropped out, so I'll take it. Yeah, the Cal game, I think, changed a few things with regards to how this schedule would have looked had they played Cal. Because remember, Cal was supposed to be played that second week at home. And that would have, I think, changed the dynamic of how the non-conference slate looks. But having Notre Dame in there, and I do think it's going to make for an interesting game. A couple of you pointing out, Jeff Stevens, I grew up in the 70s and 80s. I lived in a time when Utah was a toss-up game. Good point. But you know who you are. Wasn't a toss-up in the late 80s and early 90s. Okay, there have been stretches, yes. But I'm talking, think about roughly 2000-ish on, like the last 25 years. How many times has that game, speaking of BYU and Utah, really gotten out of hand? Probably count on one hand how many times it's really kind of been one-sided, and that's more been on Utah's side of things. I know they had the 12-game win streak in there, but there was the 12-year win streak, the 9-game win streak, I should say, 12-year streak, but 9 games in that streak. But I just look at it. I think that this schedule is going to allow BYU to pile up a bunch of wins. I think that's what we're all here for as sports fans. We want to watch our team win games. So, Robert, why does the Big 12 refuse to put Utah on rivalry game weekend? It makes no sense. They have never given us a true good reason for not doing it, other than they feel like it's better placed in earlier on in the regular season. Remember, last year, this past season, it was in mid-October. It was set around BYU's 150th anniversary as a school. It was homecoming weekend, so that played in mid-October. But this is a throwback to that first iteration of the rivalry game in the Big 12, where these two played in the first week of November. So it's kind of interesting to see how it's going to move in future seasons. But I'm with you. Personal opinion on the matter, I'd love to see it on rivalry weekend, but there's really been no real good reason given by the conference that I can remember about that. A good question here as well. Jake, can you tell me why the Big 12 would schedule BYU on conference weekend? I think it's just a dynamic of play that you have to abide by what the conference parameters are. And with the change in general conference in the evening session, it opens that door. So hopefully that answers your question. I think some of you checking in late on that. But I do think overall, it's a good schedule. It's a solid schedule. Has enough highlight games in there because I think Arizona is going to be sneaky good, if not outright good. You have ranked versus ranked opponent likely against both Utah and Notre Dame. Arizona State could be a ranked opponent if they come out of the gate strong at the start of the season. And there's inevitably a team, it feels like, every year in the Big 12 that surprises us all. So one of these teams, is it a TCU? Is it a Cincinnati? Is it Baylor that surprises us and kind of jumps up and really becomes the upstart like Arizona was this past year? And we'll see how BYU handles that. But I think the hope is that BYU and Texas Tech are squaring off next season, and that is in the Big 12 title game in a rematch of this last year's Big 12 title game. But that's going to do it for this edition of the show. We'll be back with you guys bright and early tomorrow morning. Maybe some late thoughts I have on the schedule as they come in the rest of this afternoon and evening, but obviously we'll have plenty of coverage for you guys leading up to BYU and Utah in basketball. I will reiterate to you guys, we are going to do a live edition. It's a cross collaboration with Locked On Big 12. This show, Locked On Cougars, and the Loyal Cougars podcast, part of Cougar Board. We are doing a live show at Chubby's in Orem, the Chubby's Cafe in Orem, right by the University Mall, Saturday night after the BYU Utah game wraps up. Drake Toll's going to be in town. I'll be there. Jake Edmonds, Tosh McIntosh, all four of us, panel style, having some fun at Chubby's, enjoying some food, and hopefully seeing you guys there as well. So make sure you come on out, 7 o'clock, by the way, at Chubby's Cafe in their Cougar room, which is absolutely incredible in and of itself. So as always, thank you for your support of this podcast. Thank you for making your first listen today. Go make your second listen today. Locked On College Football. Get all the inside scoop on what's going on in the sport that we all love with Spencer McLaughlin. Or if you want to check out Locked On Big 12, I don't think Drake would mind you doing that either. And as always, come back tomorrow and be an everydayer right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.